My name is Suze Morrison, and I'm the member of Provincial Parliament for Toronto Centre, and I'm going to be facilitating our evening this evening. Just to let folks know, the meeting is being recorded, and we are live streaming on 3 different platforms, including Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube. I want to welcome everyone and thank you all for joining us tonight as we talk about the schools that we need in our communities. I'm going to just give folks a few seconds to get settled in and loaded into the room and make sure folks have got their live streams up and going before we launch right into it. I see a few more folks trickling in. So again, thank you all for joining us. And again, this is being recorded and live streamed. So before we start, I do want to give a land acknowledgement and acknowledge that while we might have folks joining us virtually from different areas, that the area that MPP Chris Glover and I as co-hosts are located in here in downtown Toronto is the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, of the Haudenosaunee, of the Huron-Wendat, and most recently the Mississaugas of the Credit, as well as recognizing the long history of Métis and Inuit and urban Indigenous folks that many of whom call the city home now from all nations from all over, and also want to recognize that this area is part of the area around the Great Lakes is part of the Dish with One Spoon wampum. And if you've ever seen a wampum, they're physical belts that are traditional treaties that are made out of beads. And the dish with one spoon depicts a dish with a spoon in it. And the dish represents the land all around the Great Lakes. And it's a reminder, the spoon represents that all of the people that share this land are responsible for sharing the resources. We all eat out of the same dish with one spoon. And so we have to make sure that we are all collectively responsible to the land, responsible for caretaking it and ensuring that there are enough resources for everyone that is here as well as future generations. And an important part of that teaching is that there's no knives at the table. Reminding us that we always have to keep the peace. So with that, I'd ask us all to bring our hearts and our minds together in a good way as we talk about our children and the children in our community and the kind of future that we want to have for them. So I want to acknowledge that my very one of my favorite colleagues, MPP Chris Glover, has brought us here together tonight. So he's the MPP for Spadina-Fort York, and I represent Toronto Centre. So if you're confused about which riding you live in, if you are on the south side of the Esplanade, Chris Glover is your MPP. If you are on the north side of the Esplanade, you are with me in Toronto Centre. Not that we compete over constituents, although sometimes we do. But if you're wondering, if you're confused, who is your MPP? That's the dividing line, is the Esplanade, which means that we share a couple of communities together, which gives us the opportunity to come together for meetings like this when we're connecting with folks in, the St. Lawrence neighborhood, the Distillery, Cork Town, kind of all of those like southern neighborhoods. We work very, very closely together to represent. So before I turn things over to Chris, who's going to talk about the schools that we need, I want to talk a little bit about childcare, which I know is on the top of everyone's minds, particularly as we have been pushing for months now to get Doug Ford and this Conservative government to get to the table and finally sign the childcare agreement. I see someone commented he finally signed it. Yes, he did. But after months and months of pressure, and quite frankly, this deal has come far too late. If Doug Ford had come to the table 9 months ago to get this deal signed, parents would have $2,300 more in their bank accounts right now from what they could have saved from childcare. So, Doug Ford's hesitation and delays, needless delays in getting this deal signed, has cost a lot of families a lot of money. Well, so many families have been languishing on incredibly long wait lists for the limited number of spaces that are available and paying exorbitant amounts of money. I remember a few years ago, I had a really good friend of mine who used to live in my community right on Carlton, right at about Yonge Street. And when she had her first baby, when they looked at the price of childcare, it was cheaper for her husband to leave his trades job than it was for them to pay for childcare. So, these are the kind of decisions that families are making about if they can even afford to put their children in care, or if someone has to leave the workforce. And I say that because, when we look at, when families are making the decision for a parent to stay home, who does that labor predominantly fall onto? And we know, in the majority of cases, it's women that end up staying home to take care of kids. Well, when we look to, our neighbors in Quebec, when Quebec brought in affordable childcare, what did we see? Well, immediately we saw, about over 100,000 women all of a sudden return to the workforce who wouldn't have otherwise been able to. And, when we layer this on with, the economic recovery that we're going to be looking to do as we exit out of COVID-19, we look at who has been the most affected in the workforce by COVID-19. It's predominantly women. People are referring to it as the she session. So when we look at the supports that we need to put in place, affordable childcare has to be a part of that. But when we go back to the Quebec example, that program has basically paid for itself. It took an initial investment, sure, but once women were able to start getting back into the workforce, all of a sudden they had jobs. And when you have jobs, what do? You pay taxes. And so the return on investments in terms of the extra revenue that was coming back in economic growth and new tax revenue more than paid for the program itself. So we know that, affordable childcare makes sense in terms of, being in the best interest of children, being in the best interest of families who are struggling to make ends meet, paying exorbitant fees, and in the best interest of our economic recovery as we look to, build back after 2 very, very difficult years of the pandemic. So we've got this deal. Now, I want to talk a little bit about it. It does promise a whole bunch of new spaces. But I want to remind folks that when they're going through, some of the news articles on this, always remember to read the fine print. We do know that the number that was proposed does already include 15,000 spaces that have been in place since 2019. So it's a partial sort of re-announcement and rejigging, but we are going to see some new investments, and we certainly are grateful for that. But again, this is an investment that should have come at least 9 months ago. And the second piece that I want to talk about is, ensuring that we have high quality, affordable childcare in Ontario isn't just about making sure that we're funding, spaces and wait lists. We also need to recognize that the early childhood educators, who are the backbone of that education system, are being paid absolutely substandard wages for the work that they do. So we know that there's a current $2 an hour wage subsidy that's been put in place to top up the ECE wages. But in terms of actually maintaining staff in the system so that we can maintain these new spaces that are being created. We can't staff childcare spaces if we don't have enough workers. If the workers are leaving the sector and the industry because they're making substandard wages and they're not being treated fairly at work, we're never going to be able to staff the childcare spaces that have been committed to. So we have to ensure that we've got, an HR strategy that accompanies that to make sure that we're paying our early childhood educators a fair compensation for the highly skilled and critical work that they are doing. And I would argue, what more important work is there in our community than taking care of our smallest citizens and our smallest community members who are the future of our community. So that said, I'm certainly excited that we are finally looking at an affordable childcare deal in this province. I wish it had come 9 months earlier, and just encouraging folks to make sure that you're reading the fine print on some of these announcements, so that we fully understand what's going on, and also to recognize that we need to continue to support early childhood educators to ensure that they are treated fairly as workers in the system. So that's just a little piece on the childcare. And next, I am going to turn things over to Chris Glover, the MPP for Spadina-Fort York. Chris, the floor is all yours.
Thanks so much, Susan. Thanks for being here. Thanks for the introduction. So what I'm proposing here is I'm going to be talking about the schools we need, and I'm going to be focusing on the West Donland School, but I'm also going to be talking about other schools in Spadina-Fort York and where we are. So the model that I think we should be striving towards, and then the challenges in getting there. And I'm looking at this meeting as a working meeting. At the end of it, I want to collaborate with you, with the people who've come out tonight, to find, develop some action steps in order to achieve the schools that we need. And I know some of you, like I've been working on this, on education and fixing schools for about 25 years. But there's a lot of people on this call I know who have very specific, detailed information. And I really hope that you will be able to participate in the conversation later, once I've done the presentation. You know, if there's any gaps, anything that I haven't mentioned, if you can fill in some of those gaps, if you have questions of clarification, and then we'll talk about action steps and how to actually, you know, put the political pressure on that we need to achieve the schools that we need in Spadina-Fort York and in Toronto Centre. So I'm going to share my screen now. There we go. And let's see, can you all see that? Yes, okay, I'm seeing some nods. So the schools we need. And I'm going to talk about three things here. The first one is coming out of this pandemic, we need to provide students with the academic supports that they need in order to catch up. Second thing, we need to repair the schools that we have. And we received about 30 questions in advance of this meeting from people when you're registering. Thanks for that. I've looked through the questions. I think the presentation will answer almost all those questions, including the questions about repairing the schools that we have. And then we need to build the schools that we need. So the first thing, you know, catching students up. You know, from March 2020 till almost May 2021, students missed almost an entire year of school. And the younger the students were, the greater that impacted their academic learning. And my daughter's a grade 4 teacher. I used to be a high school teacher. The younger the kids are, the harder it is for them to learn online. The better they are, you know, in class, the more they need the in-class supports. So one of the challenges that we're facing is that this is from a People for Education report that came out just a week ago. 90% of Ontario principals saying staffing shortages has been a challenge through the pandemic. And I was talking to the Ontario Association of Principals, and they were saying, one of the principals said that in one day, 3 weeks ago, half of her staff, you know, were gone with COVID and other things. So, you know, half of her staff. And she said, when you've got an elementary school and you've got half your staff gone and the kids are still coming, all you're doing is just trying to, you know, make sure you've got safety supervision through the day. It's very difficult to teach. So we absolutely need to have a hiring blitz. We need to be training. We need to be expanding our teachers college, our faculty of education enrollment in order to get more teachers on stream. And we also need before and after tutoring for students. And we need to do some assessments to identify students who have fallen behind academically so that we can give them the supports to catch up. And I will say there's an equity element to this. Lower income students, BIPOC students have been disproportionately more greatly impacted by the pandemic. And so helping students to catch up, this is also an equity issue. And it's also for the future of all of us. You know, we all need the next generation to be as well educated as possible, because someday we may be in a nursing home and we want a well-trained staff, a well-educated person there looking after us. The second thing I was going to talk about was the maintenance backlog. It's $16.3 billion across the province. And I've been working, there's a woman named Krista Wiley, and she started a group called Fix Our Schools about 10 years ago. And I was working with her before I was an MPP. And she was able to find out what the maintenance backlog in our schools, the government, the Liberal government at the time, and this was in around 2015, 16, they would not reveal. She was putting in FOIs to find out how much the maintenance backlog was. And then there was a document that said something about 10% of the maintenance backlog was $150 million. And so then she actually asked them, well, does that mean that the real maintenance backlog is $15 billion? And that's when it came out. So our maintenance backlog in 2003 was $5.6 billion. And this is in the schools, the 600 schools in this, 600? Yeah, schools in this province. In 2018, it had gone up to $15.9 billion. And by 2021, it was $16.3 billion. So it's continuing to grow, this maintenance backlog. And our students, like one of the things that we need to convince the government is our students need well-maintained schools. It's essential for learning. And so we've got to develop a plan to address this maintenance backlog. And so this is a breakdown for our two ridings. This is the breakdown for Spadina-Fort York. And our total maintenance backlog in Spadina-Fort York is $52 million. Now, there are only 12 schools in Spadina-Fort York. There's two with the biggest maintenance backlog are Ryerson Public School and Charles G. Fraser. Okay, so and the next is St. Mary's Catholic School. So we've got three schools with over $5 million in maintenance backlog. And so it's this enormous problem, and we need to address it. In Toronto Centre, there's $127.5 million. And these figures are from the Fix Our Schools website from that Krista Riley and a group of parents run. Okay. So before I was an MPP, I was a school trustee, and I was working with a group called the Campaign for Public Education. And we hired Hugh McKenzie, who's an economist, a progressive economist. And we asked him, so look, our maintenance backlog at the time was $15.9 billion. How do you address that? Like, develop a plan for us. And he wrote this report in 2017 called The Fix Is Not In. And it lays out a plan for actually addressing the maintenance backlog. And if you're interested in learning more about it, you can just Google it, it's online. Okay. And it is also published by the Fix Our Schools. It's on the Fix Our Schools website. Okay, so that's the maintenance backlog, something that we need to address. And now I want to talk about the schools that we need in Spadina-Fort York. And raise your hand, raise your virtual hand, if you know what building is in this picture. I see Heather Mitchell knows. Okay, actually, you know what? Type it in the chat. First person to type it in the chat wins.
Do you have a prize, Chris?
No. I didn't think that far ahead.
You just win our love and affection, that's all.
That's right, yes.
Enoch
yes.
Turner.
They will get the glory. They will get the glory. Let's see. Okay, have we got? Yeah, it's Enoch Turner. Yeah, Javon won. Okay, and Javon and Heather Mitchell's a close second. Oh, hold on, there was somebody else there. Xavier and Lester. Okay.
Lester also chimed in pretty early too.
Yeah. It's all pretty close. Okay. Okay. Anyways, look, thanks for that. So this is Enoch Turner Schoolhouse. It's a beautiful, beautiful building. It's not the kind of school that we need today, but it is a gorgeous building. And if you've never been down there, I highly recommend going. Okay. Let's see. For some reason, there we go. Okay. So recently, the Lower Yonge Precinct School was announced, and it's the first school that's going to be entirely housed within a condominium podium. And it's going to be the third floor of the Menkes development on Yonge Street. And the cost is $44 million. And I wrote an article in Now Magazine. I said, you know what, this is a really innovative solution but it's not the model that we should be moving towards. Like there's a better model in the area in our riding that I think is the model that we should be looking towards. This one, the big challenge with it is it's on the third floor. The school's on the third floor. So you're going to have a 500 student elementary school on the third floor of a school, third floor of this condo podium, and the playground is across the street. So you're going to have to get 500 kids down 3 flights of stairs across the street to the playground, you know, in the morning, at recess, at lunch, at afternoon recess, and then at the end of the day. So it's going to be a real challenge. And there was talk about building a bridge for the kids to be able to just walk across and down, which would be much safer and would require much less time in terms of staffing. Right now, that's been rejected, and it's something that I'm going to be pushing for. Like the government announced the school, but they haven't announced funding to build a bridge so kids can get safely across the street to the playground. So if this is something that you're interested in advocating with me, let me know at the end of the meeting when we're having our discussion. Okay, the second one, Liberty Village. We need, these are more schools that we need. So Liberty Village, Villiers Island, hang on, and Keating Channel. So we need at least 3 more schools in our riding. Liberty Village now has about 14,000 people with the 6 new towers that were completed over the last year and a half. And they do have an option on the Armory property. And that's going to, I don't know when that's going to be expiring, but they do have an option for the Armory. Keating Channel School, the precinct plan is to have 92. So this is the east waterfront. There's a plan to have 9,200 new residents and 1 public school. And it'll serve both Keating Channel and the East Bayfront precincts. Villiers Island, it's the plan, and you can see the drawing of Villiers Island on the slide. The plan is to have several schools there. The challenge is that in order to secure a school site, the school boards, both school boards, need to work with the municipality so that the school becomes part of the secondary plan for that local, or the precinct plan for that local area. And then the board secures an option agreement with the landowner, which is what the TDSB has done with the Armory property which is between Fort York and Liberty Village. And then the third step is the school boards apply to the Ministry of Education for funds to purchase land through the Land Priorities Program. And the problem with this process is that the school, particularly the TDSB, comes to the table empty-handed. So they can say, look, Villiers Island is being built. We're going to need at least 1, maybe 2 public schools. We need to purchase land in order to house those schools, but we have no money. And so they can negotiate to get it into the secondary plan. They can negotiate with the landowner to get an option to buy it, but they can't actually purchase the property unless they get permission and funding from the Ministry of Education, which sometimes comes and sometimes doesn't come because the ministry is dividing their funding among 72 different school boards. Let's see. And I'm going to go into the details about what I think should be happening instead of that process. But first, let's talk about the West Donlands, the new West Donlands Elementary School. It's on a site called Block 9, and it's 1.63 acres. And it was acquired by the TDSB in a land swap between the province and the TDSB in 2016 for 2 other schools, a school in Etobicoke and a school in North York. And I was actually a trustee at the time that this land swap was made. And so I was very familiar with the school in Etobicoke, and it was an old elementary school. Both of these were old elementary schools that were not operating as elementary schools, but were housing not-for-profit programs for students with children with disabilities. So that was the swap. They wanted to preserve those programs, and so we got Block 9. The plan is for a 455 student elementary school that should open. The schedule was to open in September 2027. The site is not ideal. There's a number of encumbrances that are listed in the TDSB's description of this property. First, it's adjacent to a railroad track, and Metrolinx is going to be using the site for the construction of the Ontario line until January 2027. So the school is not going to be even started until presumably after they're done with that property. It also, although it's 1.6 acres, there's a requirement for a 30-meter setback from the railroad tracks to accommodate a buffer for the railroad tracks. And so that reduces the size of the property. And the school board is saying right now that there's not sufficient room for childcare on the site. And this is an issue because the model that we should be moving towards is extended day, so that parents can drop off their kids at the daycare center on the school site at 8 in the morning and then pick up their child at 5 o'clock in the evening from the childcare center. And that's the model that we've been moving towards. But unless we make some adjustments here, it's not going to be possible on this site. So that's something else that we need to push for. And it's the playground is going to be a portion of Corktown Common. And because of the small size, and I'll give you an example, like an average elementary school size, when you think, it's particularly if you're looking in Etobicoke, North York, Scarborough, when you're looking at an average elementary school site, it's about 5 acres, sometimes 6 acres. An average high school is 10 acres because you need to accommodate both the building and usually a football field or a play field like that. So 5 acres is the norm for an elementary school. We do live in an incredibly dense part of the city. And so, but the 1.63, it's going to be a challenge to fit a school in there. So it could end up, and I've spoken to a number of people at the TDSB, it could end up being in a condo podium, but that hasn't been decided yet. Okay. So there's 2 challenges that we're faced with when we're trying to build the schools we need in Spadina-Fort York and in Toronto Centre. The first one is education development charges. There was a regulation passed by the former provincial government in 1998 that said that only school boards that are at 100% capacity in their schools can collect education development charges. And that can be anywhere within their precinct, within their district. And so what this has meant is that the Catholic school board, their high schools are packed. In fact, they need more high schools. So they're allowed to collect education development charges, which is about $2,700 per unit, or $1.30 and $1.30 per square foot for commercial construction. So every residential unit that goes up in the city, the TCDSB is getting $2,700. So, and the money can only be used to purchase or prepare land for the construction of a school. It can't be used to repair existing schools, and it can't be used to build new schools. And so this is one of the frustrations with this model. The TDSB does not get anything. So all the condo towers that are going up, the TDSB is not getting any education development charges. That's why when they go to the city or when they go to the developer, when an area is being developed, like the East Waterfront or Corktown or Villiers Islands, the TDSB has no money. They come to the table empty-handed. And so this is one of the challenges with building the schools that we need. We absolutely need this regulation to be repealed so that schools can be built, that we can build the schools we need. And I'll give you an example of City Place. Let's see. So City Place was planned in 1994. Dan Leckie and Jack Layton were city councillors at the time, and they pushed for the developer to set aside 12 acres in the middle of the property of the development, and to pay for a public school, a Catholic school, a childcare center, a drop-in center, and a community center, all under a green roof. And it was open. Now, it took 26 years to actually get built, but it was finally opened in 2020. And so September 2019. So it was an incredible, actually it was more January 2019, but it's an incredible accomplishment, and it shows the model of what we should be aiming for. You know, as we're developing along the waterfront here, we should be planning our schools and then planning and building the community around them. That's the model that I would really like to see. But because the TDSB does not collect education development charges, at least on the public school side, they're not at the table. They cannot, say, oh, look, you're building Villiers Island. Let's partner with the city. We'll set aside a big, acreage in the middle, and or somewhere in the site, and we'll build a community center, a Catholic school, a public school, all on there, and model it on City Place. They're not able to do that because they don't get those education development charges. The other thing is EDU stands for Ministry of Education. It's the short form, and they control the Land Acquisition Fund. So if a school board wants to acquire land for an area that's being developed, like the East Waterfront or like Villiers Island, they have to go through apply to the Land Acquisition Fund at the Ministry of Education. And they're competing with 72 other school boards there. And even though And the two biggest school boards by far are the TDSB and the TCDSB. So there's 247,000 students at the TDSB, and there's 92,000 students at the TCDSB. So, and there's 2 million in total across the province. So we've got what, 350 in public and Catholic schools in Toronto. And yet when it comes to applying for land acquisition or applying for new school buildings, we're competing with another 70 boards across the province. Okay, so one of the solutions that we've been pushing for, and I've been pushing for this since at least 2014. I held a press conference in 2014 asking the government at that time to change this regulation so that all boards across the province would be able to collect education development charges. They refused. This government, we've been pushing. The TDSB actually took them to court and lost, but they refused to charge education development charges or allow both boards to collect education development charges in Toronto. And the other thing that boards need is they need greater control of their funding so that they're not competing with 70 other boards when we're planning our schools here in the city of Toronto. And this speaks to, provincial overreach into the planning of the city. And I think all of us, particularly in Toronto, feel that overreach all the time, especially when we're coming to things like municipal elections or a government trying to seize our subways. Let's see. The other thing, so that was about acquiring land. About building schools, there's limited capital funding. Each board, so each of the 72 boards submits 10 priority projects each year. And then the province decides which of those they will fund. And they will only fund a project that can be complete in 2 years. So the West Donland School now, because the property is going to be taken over by Metrolinx for 5, 6, or 7 years, that's going to drop off. Right now, the West Donland School in last year's submissions to the ministry was the number 7 priority. And now it's going to be, it probably dropped off the list. So we're not going to get that school built, anytime until after Metrolinx is done with that property. Let's see. And the other frustration is that they can only build to the number of students in a community. And this is a real problem for us. Like when I was on the school board, there were so many times when we'd say, well, look, this community is still growing to the ministry. And they would say, well, you've got this many students, so we're going to build a school and we'll give you a little bit of extra. But it was never enough. And so there were several times when partway through the construction, the staff would come to the trustees of the school board and say, look, we need to actually build a bigger school. And so then they would, and there'd be this extra cost of, instead of planning for a bigger school to begin with, building this, adding this on. And it's incredibly, incredibly frustrating for the trustees to be micromanaged by the Ministry of Education, to have no money and then, to only be able to build for the number of students in the community. And this is a B memo, if people are familiar with that. So there's different levels of directives from the provincial government. There's memos, which are directives to, arm's length corporations of the province, like school boards. And then there's regulations, and then there's legislation. And so this is a memo from the province, from the Ministry of Education to the school boards. And so this is why this number 3 here can only build to the number of students in the community. It's why it took 26 years for the City Place School to be built, because they could not build the school. They could not get the money from the Ministry of Education until the community was built out. And then, so there was a delay of 26 years. We don't want to be waiting 26 years for the West Donland School to be built. So we need the government to override this B memo, okay, and this directive. So we need, and the solutions here for building the schools we need are to allow school boards greater independence to build the schools that they need. And the other thing is, and I'll go back to City Place, for example. So they were only allowed to build a school based on the projection for the number of students in the community. The challenge is that in City Place, the number of students doubled. The number of children in the community doubled when they started construction on the school. So there used to be 1.8 students per 100 units in City Place in 2016. The school was started in 2017 and it was completed in 2019. And by that time, the number of students had doubled to 3.2 students per 100 units. And there'd been another 600 units. So it's more than a doubling of the actual number of children in the community. And this really speaks to a chicken and egg argument. And it's something that was a real challenge for the school board when I was a trustee, is that you can't, they say, well, look, they're building this condo community based on other condo communities. We project that there will be so many students in that community, but they're projecting based on communities without a school. And what the City Place example showed is that if you build the school, children, they will come. If you build it, they will come. Children will come to a community, or parents will move in with children to a community where there's a school. If there's no school, parents won't move into that community, or they're less likely to move into that community. So the projections are wrong. And by 2024, City Place will be oversubscribed. And they're going to be looking at moving some of the students into other schools in the neighborhood, in the surrounding area, because that school is going to be too full. So it's one of the challenges. There's a number of things that need to be changed at the ministry level, at the provincial level, if we're going to get the West Donland schools and the East Waterfront, the Liberty Street School, or the Liberty Village School and the Villiers schools. If we're going to get those built, there's a number of things that we need to change at the provincial level. Okay. So the next step that I want to talk about is open this up for discussion and developing an action plan with you so that we can actually build the schools that we need. So I'll open it up, and Suze is going to facilitate this part. So Suze, if you have a question or a comment, you can raise your virtual hand, you can raise your real hand, or you can type the question in the comments in the chat, and Suze will field the questions, and I'll do my best to answer them.
Great, thank you, Chris. We already have a question here from, let me scroll up and find it, from Lester Brown. Hi, Lester. So Lester wrote in the chat, could you explain why Corktown Common would not be suitable for a play area like Market Lane used as part of Crombie Park?
Okay, so I wouldn't say that Corktown Common is not suitable. I mean, it can work. I know it can work, and it makes sense to have a park as a schoolyard during the day, and then back to a park in the evening, particularly in densely populated areas downtown. It's a matter of making sure that the kids can get across the street. And at Market Lane, they've got on site, they've got a play area for the primary students. So the primary students do have their recess on the school site without crossing the road. The junior students, the grades 4, 5, and 6 students, go across the road. And so they're a little bit older. So you're not taking a bunch of 4 and 5-year-olds across the road every day. There was a tunnel built, and people, I know a lot of you are a lot more ensconced in the history of the neighborhood than I am, but there was a tunnel built under the Esplanade to get the kids across the road. But there's something wrong with it. There's the soil around it was toxic, and it's leaching toxins into the tunnel. So it's not safe to use, apparently. Okay, next question.
Thank you, Chris. Okay, we've got 2 hands up. I think I saw Cynthia Wilkie's hand go up first. So Cynthia, we'll go to you first.
Okay, thanks. I'm just trying to get in. So Chris, thanks for this. I wanted to, like Lester, I want to defend the West Donland School site. I get a little frustrated hearing it kind of described as being an inferior site. It was designed in 2004 as part of the Precinct plan in consultation with the city and the Toronto District School Board. The actual play, the park area is accessible without going across a through street at all. So it's I think a very good use of a community resource, and I really don't think it helps us to talk about it in a way that makes it sound as though there's something wrong with that site. It's the reality, I think, of building downtown schools, that we are going to have to be more efficient, combine schools with condo buildings if that's what's needed, look at design elements like play areas on rooftops for younger children, or on, anyway, and there are very active there's very active work right now to see whether there could be additional childcare work in an adjacent, or childcare opportunity in an adjacent building. So, I mean, we haven't even begun to design this this school yet. So I just please encourage you, beg you to talk positively about the school, not negatively, because we really don't want that filtering down to it, or the result of that to be that it's sort of at the bottom of the list for TDSB because it's got problems. I'm not sure it does. I think there's all issues that can be easily addressed through design. So that's a comment. And the question is, Chris, I'm just wondering what you can suggest in the way of strategies to deal specifically with this site. I mean, I'm alarmed by what you've said about it dropping off the priority list. Like, I don't think we can let that happen. And we need to get the provincial government to address the fact that Metrolinx, its own agency, is the one that's doing this to the community. And they need to give back to this community. And one of the ways they can do that is by absolutely working with the Minister of Education to ensure that funding is in place so that design work can start before Metrolinx vacates the site and shovels can go into the ground the minute they leave. So can you help us with that?
Yes.
Suze and Chris, we're looking at, whether or not you can help us to jolt that kind of action out of Metrolinx.
Yeah. So first, I'll deal with the comment first. I'm not so much like the encumbrances that I mentioned on the West Donland site are on the TDSB website. Like that's in their capital priority projects. They listed their 10 capital priority projects in 2021. That's right from there. And the reason that I'm highlighting it is that we as a community need to be aware of what those encumbrances are so that we can minimize them when the plan is being designed, when the school is being designed. And that's why, like, I'm looking at this, sorry, as a work group. Like, I'm looking in your second question about how do we, as MPPs, and as a community, how do we put pressure on Metrolinx and on the government to address, get the school built well and get it built as quickly as possible? That's what we're here to talk about. As far as the city place, I would hold it up as the standard, though, that we should be aiming towards for the construction of new sites, particularly like when we've got a site like Villiers Island, where there's absolutely nothing. They're building the land, right? They're dredging, the land right now. That there's an opportunity to do something like a city place where you actually, but we'll need the developer to actually, and the city and the province and the school boards to sit down and plan for the school and build the community around it. And I think that's what we should be aiming for in the long run. In the meantime, the West Donland School, we absolutely will work with you. We'll work with the community, Suze and I, to put pressure on Metrolinx and on the provincial government to get this school built and to minimize the encumbrances that are described in the TDSB's capital priorities document. So we would like to see the childcare center on the site. And, we need to start talking about planning that and what are the design elements? Is that possible? It's possible. Like, it's right now, I've heard different things from people in the school board about whether this school may actually be housed in the podium of a condo tower, which would be fine. But then if that's the case, is it possible that condo tower could also house a childcare center right on site? So you don't have to be taking the children across the street for, between the childcare and the school. And absolutely, we need to maximize the outdoor play space for the kids, and utilizing the Corktown Common to do that makes a lot of sense.
Okay, thank you so much, Chris. Our next question is from Diana Belshaw. Go ahead, Diana, unmute yourself. You should be able to. Yep, there you go. Oh, we can't hear you. Tech folks, can you help us unmute Diana?
There we go.
There we go.
Okay, muted, unmuted. Thank you, Chris. Actually, your last comment is one of the things that I wanted to pick up on, because when you're talking about building a school, talking about the West Don Lands School,
Yeah.
we do have a school site. We don't have a school and we have no money for it. Yes. When you talk about building in a condo tower, I find that confusing because there aren't any condo towers yet to be built that really haven't been designed, except perhaps at the Foundry, which is some distance away from Corktown Common. So I don't see how realistic the idea is of building in a condo tower. Our neighborhood doesn't have any more places for condos, right? So that doesn't make sense to me. And I do want to follow up with what Cindy said, because I really think, I mean, one of the things that scares me, and I read the article in Now Magazine, and then again, hearing you tonight, the more that we feed the belief that this is a substandard site for a school, which I don't think it is. I think it's actually a brilliant site for a school. The more possible it is that Metrolinx or the provincial government will remove it from us and do something else with it. And that really, truly does scare me, because we've seen that happen recently. And if they can say, oh, well, the community doesn't want it anyway, it would be very easy for somebody to take it over. And that, I think, is a real problem. I think there are lots of solutions that can be found.
Yes.
To what you call encumbrances. I prefer, let's get all feeling, ooey gooey about this and call them challenges. Yeah, they're challenges, but they're design challenges. And my understanding is the part that the design challenge is that having a childcare center on the railroad line is perhaps a problem, that there are requirements for childcare, early childhood care, that might be problematic. But there are conversations about including childcare spaces in very close by condos. So I'm just a bit worried about this. And
Yeah. Okay,
I'm wondering if you have specifics, like
yeah.
what condo are we talking about here?
Okay, so as far as the condo, it's just discussion at the school board. That's one possibility. They're looking at different ways of actually getting this school built, because as well as needing the money to build the school, they also need to remediate the site. And so there's a number of challenges with this site. And the reason, that I think, and I hear what you're saying, I don't think Metro, like this was a deal that's, that was made between Infrastructure Ontario and the school boards. I don't think they're going to backtrack on it. The intention is to build the school. The TDSB wants to build the school, and I think as far as the design challenges go, that's where we as a community need to come together with the school board and find solutions for those challenges, so that our students and our children who go to that school will have the best experience possible. And so that's why I brought them up tonight, just so that we can find the solutions. Because if we don't, have an open and frank conversation about the challenges that we're facing, then we won't be able to develop the solutions. But I do hear you. I absolutely want to get the school built. I understand. I hear from from you, the number of years that the community's been working on this. And that's why I asked for this meeting, for us to come together. And I know the West Don Lands group, I've attended many of your meetings, the St. Lawrence Neighborhood Association, the Gooderman Wards Neighborhood Association, like you guys have a ton of expertise. You saved the Foundry, so if you can do that, we can get this school built. And you saved the Foundry with the assistance of Kristen Wong-Tam and Suze Morrison. And so to get the school built, Suze and I and you will work together to get this school built and to overcome the challenges, so that students have the best experience possible.
Thank you so much, Chris. I want to go to the chat next, because we've had a few questions come in on the chat. So we had one from Javon, who says, what is your plan to encourage and push for the current PC government, specifically Stephen Lecce, who's the Minister of Education for folks who don't know, to meet and work with the TDSB in the coming months to ensure that communities that need schools can get them.
Yeah. So this is a government that doesn't listen, and it's one of the real challenges, you know. But I think the way that we've been able to push this government has been to mobilize community, and so that we don't go as a single MPP or as two MPPs. We actually go as MPPs with our community to the ministry, and that's what the purpose of this meeting is, to actually mobilize the community. Just like they backtracked, they were going to cut education, they were going to mandate 4 online classes for high school. They knocked it down to 2. They backtracked on some of their cuts a few years ago, and they did it because we mobilized the community of parents and students, not just in Toronto, but across the province, to fight against those cuts. We saved the Foundry because the community and the local politicians came together to save the Foundry. We as a community and as your local representatives, we will come together with you and we will fight to get this school built and to make it the best possible school that it can be.
Okay, thank you so much, Chris. I see that we've got a hand up on the screen. Elenamurray, if you want to unmute yourself. Tech folks, if we can get a hand there. There we go. Go ahead, Elena.
Oh, hi, good evening. When I saw this email, maybe this is not the right place to ask this question, but one of the questions asked or posted on the email was the schools that we need. So I would like to ask you, how do you envision the schools that we need, Mr. Glover?
You mean like structurally? So I would say, I was a high school teacher from 1990 to 99. And then I went into research, and then I became a trustee for 8 years, from 2010 to 2018.
Yeah.
The schools we need, like there's the physical structure of the school, and the physical structure of the school has to have easy access to outdoor spaces. That's one of the things that it has to have. Students need to be able to come and go into and out of the school quite easily. And it needs a good play structure. Kids need place to run. And then within the school, you need, a clean, well-maintained school building. And you need innovative spaces. So I would say, it's a big question that you're asking. I would say the other thing, as well as the physical building of the school, being like airy and lots of windows and lots of natural sunlight in the space. I would say the other thing is you need a real sense of community in that school. And there needs to be a community within the school, among the students and the parents. And the school should also be operating as a community center in the evenings, so that the space is open to the community and it becomes a true community hub. I think that's the ideal model of a school that's for the kids during the day, and then kids and adults and community members in the evening. And the other thing I would say about a school, it needs to be accessible for everyone. It needs to be welcoming for everyone. Disability should not be a barrier to entering schools. And too often, and particularly in our older buildings, they are not barrier-free schools. And we need to make sure that our schools have universal design and that everybody can enter those schools. Other questions, Suze?
Yep, thank you so much, Chris. We've got another question from Cynthia Wilkie, who says, Chris, can you talk a bit more about the education development charge? Is it currently collected for every new unit that is built, but only given to the TCDSB, or is it collected in areas where the TCDSB school is being considered?
It's universal. It's across the city. So every unit that is going up in the city, $2,700 is currently going to the TCDSB, and nothing's going to the TDSB. And both boards need to build schools. The other thing that I would change, so it's a regulation, it's from 1998, and it's the other thing I would change in that. It can only be used currently to purchase land or to prepare land for construction. I would change those education development charges so that it could actually be used to refurbish existing schools, to address some of that $16.3 billion maintenance backlog, and to build new schools. So it can be used for capital as well.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Chris. I saw, right as we went to Cynthia's question, I saw Ileana's hand go up again. I think, did you have a follow-up to your last question?
Yeah, sorry, it's my turn now?
Yep, go ahead.
Okay, yeah, so I just wanted to run it by you, how I envision the schools, and you were talking about a community, more like being a multi-purpose center. And I would love to see greenhouses built in the schools so children can, and the children, I mean, teaching children gardening 101 should be like a must in every school. Every child should have the experience of putting their hand in the dirt. That builds their immune system. It creates empathy, creativity, fights allergies, and that greenhouse can be used as a social enterprise now more so given the issues with climate change, food insecurity, and food mileage, everything we put in to bring food from down south. Why can we design schools that are multi-purpose and main of all, raise kids that are environmentally conscious? And they know where the food comes from.
So I'm going to go back a little bit and just until 1995, the TDSB and the Catholic Board collected education taxes within the city of Toronto. After that, after Bill 160, the provincial government took control of those education taxes. And before, up to that point, the TDSB, for example, was completely self-funded. So the province could, and they were building things like there were greenhouses in schools. There were often, other communities built for example, there's a school in North Bay where they built the community hockey rink attached to the high school because it made sense. We used to build swimming pools in our schools in Toronto. But after 1995, when the province took control of our education taxes and then, gave some back, and it's led to 26 years of cuts to our system, them having control of our education taxes. There hasn't been funding to build things like extras, like greenhouses or swimming pools in our schools. And that's been incredibly frustrating. So we actually need, this is one of the reasons we need education development charges. And we need the TDSB and the TCDSB to have greater financial independence from the provincial government. So they don't have to go to the provincial government every time they need something.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Chris. We do only have 2 minutes left. We do want to get wrapped up here at 8 o'clock. Cynthia, I do see your hand up, so we'll go back to you. But if you can make it quick so that Chris has time to respond and we can wrap up, okay?
You need to let me, oh, am I
Oh, there you
unmuted? Okay,
Yeah.
great. So this is just a follow-up on the education development taxes. Would they have, I guess there's not time. I'd like to know what the rationale is for the money only going to the Catholic District School Board. But I also want to understand if there is a campaign to extend it to the public school board, would the amount of the education development tax have to be increased? Or is there enough money flowing around that it could be apportioned between the two boards?
It would have to be increased. The Catholic Board is allowed to collect them, and they're charging according to what their needs are going to be, what they project their needs are going to be. The TDSB is not allowed to collect. And the reason the TDSB is not allowed to collect is that not all of the schools in the Toronto District School Board are 100% full. So if you've got some, schools that are, even if they're leased out to, like those two schools that I mentioned that were swapped for the Block 9 property. There was a school in Etobicoke and a school in North York that were swapped for the Block 9 property. Those schools, even though they had not-for-profit programs for children with disabilities, they were considered quote unquote empty schools by the Ministry of Education. So the TDSB was docked for them. That was one of the reasons that the TDSB sold those properties, because they were being penalized for having those schools, what the ministry considered empty schools. And so it needs to be, this is one of the frustrations with this education development charges. Obviously, there's incredible intensive development along the waterfront, along the Yonge Street corridor, all the way up to Steeles. And we need, and in pockets in other areas of the city, we absolutely need to be building schools in these communities, and we need education development charges, and we need all boards, not just our local boards in Toronto, but all boards across the province should be able to collect those education development charges, because the idea of development charges is that development's supposed to pay for development, and that's why we need those. Now, there is a petition, and Nancy, do you have the link to the petition? Yeah, so we'll put that in the chat. And if you'd like to sign the petition to get us education development charges, then we, Suze and I can take it to the legislature.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Chris. We are 1 minute over 8 o'clock. So we are going to wrap things up and close out our evening. I want to thank you all so much for joining us here tonight. And Chris, I'll just turn it back to you if you have any last comments that you want to make.
Yeah. So we're limited on our time. If you have further questions, email my office or email Suze's office, and we will try to get those questions answered. But I want to thank all of you for being here. I want to thank you for your incredible passion for building our communities. This is why we have such rich, vibrant condo communities in the downtown core of the city, is because of the groups like you and people like you who continuously fight for our communities. And this meeting tonight was about fighting for the schools that we need. And so we will, I will round back. or Diana, I'll reach out to you, and Cynthia, I'll reach out to you, and we can collaborate and figure out ways to actually get the West Donland School built and solve some of those challenges that we've been talking about. Okay, wonderful. Okay, have a wonderful night, everybody. Thank you for being here. And
Thank you for joining us.